Before installing the shelter deck on the hood, I'm going to paint it. The deck needs to be painted in two colors, semtex and quartosine. But before I can paint the deck, I need to mask off the walls. I find it easier to paint the walls first and then mask them off, rather than painting the deck first and then masking the deck off and painting the walls. This is because the walls will typically have a flat base where they connect to the floor, and it's easier to mask off that line. Looking at what needs to be painted, I think it's going to be easier to cover the quartosine with masking tape than it will be to cover the semtex. So I'll paint the quartosine first. It's the orange color that goes mostly in the middle over here. And then I'll mask it off and paint the semtex, which goes around the edges. In this area is where there are a number of hatches in the quartosine covered area. I'll just paint them over in quartosine and then mask them off and paint them in the hull color. It'll be far easier to do it that way than to try and mask off and protect these hatches while painting the quartosine. Once the deck is painted, I'll then install the wooden deck, and then the entire assembly can be installed onto the ship. To mask off the splinter shields and balustrades, I'm using 6mm Tamiya masking tape. The balustrades or splinter shields have a slight reg to them. They taper towards the top, which means that when I place the masking tape at the base, that has a slightly narrower perimeter than at the top of the balustrade. This means that I'll be able to make good contact at the base, but it will peel away slightly at the top. This is okay because I am applying the paint to the deck, and that's where the contact will be best. I find that it is easier to mask off walls than it is to mask off the deck. As you can see, you're able to mask off the walls using single pieces of masking tape that you in effect wrap around the wall. Whereas if I were to try and mask off the deck, that would require me to cut many small pieces of tape and precisely fit them to the curvature of the walls or rails or whatever it is you're trying to mask off. Either option ends up with the same effect. I just think that this is the easier way of going about it. Nevertheless, it is a fairly intensive process and takes longer than you might expect. It also does make it a little bit more difficult to spray into these tubs. You have far less access to them from above because the tape does tend to curve in a little bit. It might also be that when you spray the floor, you hit the top of the balustrades and then need to do a little touch up with the paint for the walls. But that can be done with a paintbrush, and if that does happen, there's usually not a lot of it, and it's quite easy to touch that up. So while with this method of masking there may be a bit more back and forth, I think in totality it's actually easier to do it this way than to mask the deck and then paint the walls. This video is part of a build series on the HMS hood. If you are enjoying this video and would like to see other videos in the build series, then follow the link to the playlist in the cards above. If you have any questions that you would like me to answer, then feel free to post them in the comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe to support the channel. Since the area where the wooden deck will be installed won't need to be painted, those hatches can be masked off, but I don't need to precisely mask them, I just need to cover them with strips of masking tape. Once that's done, I can then start painting. I'm starting with XF79. This is linoleum brown. I'm using this to represent the color of quartosine on the HMS hood. I'm starting with the quartosine because when it comes to the masking pattern that I need to complete for this area of the ship, I think it'll be easier to mask off the quartosine areas and then paint the semtex areas than it would be to paint the semtex areas, then mask off the quartosine areas. Since at this point everything is masked off, there really isn't much to spraying on this paint. I'm just trying to get it to where it needs to go and try and keep the finish as clean as possible. After giving the paint some time to dry, I then apply the masking tape to mask off the quartosine areas so that I can then spray the areas in the color that I'm using for semtex, that is XF54. I use Tamiya masking tape to mask off the boundaries to get a clean edge, and for the areas where I just need to cover the deck to protect the underlying paint, I use cheap hardware store-bought masking tape. Once masked off, I can spray the deck in XF54. This proceeds in much the same way as it did when I sprayed the quartosine areas of the deck. If there is any complexity to this, it's just making sure that I don't spray from too high an angle and cause paint to go in and land on the top of the balustrades that I've masked off. Other than that, it's a simple process. After giving the paint a short time to dry, I peel off all the masking tape and compare the layout to the image that is provided from Sovereign Hobbies on the HMS Hood Association's website. As you can see, the match is almost perfect. There are just 2 lines of semtex colored paint that I need to apply. So I mask off those areas and spray them in XF54. Now that the deck itself is painted in the correct colors, I need to focus my attention back onto the hatches. These are all simple rectangles, so they are easy enough to mask off. Once the hatches are masked off, I spray them in XF53, the color of the hull. After removing the masking tape, I just check the lines again to see if they're all nice and crisp, and once again compare it to the painting guide from Sovereign Hobbies. At this point, everything is looking good. The only thing that is missing is the section of wooden deck. So now is the time to install the last piece of wooden deck veneer. I'm going to use the same method that I used to install the larger pieces that went on the forecastle deck and the quarter deck. I start by cutting a small section out so I can peel off the exterior of the deck, leaving the part that I want to install on the ship stuck to the plastic backing. In some locations, the cut to the deck isn't deep enough and I need to use a knife to peel back the excess. The very first thing that I want to do after removing the excess around the edge is to remove the opening that will go above the stairway that I had to open up with that piece of plastic that was erroneously molded in place by Trumpeter. I want to check the alignment. I want to see if I'm quite close. And with a very quick check, it seems as though I am surprisingly spot on. I don't actually need to make any adjustments. So that hardly ever happens. Don't think that I'm that good. I'm not. That was all luck. Anyways, spurred on by that little bit of encouragement, I continue to remove the excess pieces that are blocking the various openings around the deck. After opening the areas on the deck where there will be raised sections of deck sticking through them, I then peel the deck off of its backing and install it onto the ship. I'm starting at the aft of the shelter deck because there's this nice enclosed area which will help with precisely positioning the deck. So if I'm able to get that part correct and pushed down into its correct location, I think it'll be easier to then work forward and have the deck slowly align itself to all the features. This is a fairly small section of wooden deck, and it isn't a very complicated area of the ship, so installation is actually quite simple, but you still need to be methodical about it. So I gently press down the deck, making sure that it stays as level as possible as I move forward. I think this went very well. I'm quite happy that I've been able to get all 4 pieces of deck for this ship, at least wooden pieces of deck for this ship, onto the model, into their correct location, first time without damaging any of the pieces. If you've ever worked with wooden decks, that's a bit of an achievement. So now that the wooden deck is on, the last thing to do is to check it against the reference picture from Sovereign Hobbies, and as you can see, it's a perfect match. So that is where I'll end this video. In the next video, the shelter deck will finally be installed onto the ship. If you would like to support this channel or see how the ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.